I spent the last 4 videos building systems to fix my focus, sleep, mornings, deep work blocks, distraction tracking, increase my total work hours, and the systems were working. But every session, I felt this low-level pull. Like something in the background was just running, still looking for an exit. Even with all the limits on my phone, tracking all the lag time, when I was technically in the work, and I started to think the problem isn't the environment anymore. The problem is what I've been feeding my brain in every gap between the work. So I ran an experiment. 7 days, no cheap dopamine, no drugs or alcohol, no short form content, no social media, no TV shows or YouTube for entertainment. By day 3, something happened that I didn't expect. I'll tell you what it is at the end, but first, here's what I think is the variable that most people miss entirely. This is part 5 of fixing my life like a system. I'm Patrick. I make these videos as a message to my younger self of lessons I wish I knew sooner. In this world full of noise and distraction, I want to help filter some of this out so you can focus on what actually matters. Section 1. Why environment fixes aren't enough. Here's what 4 weeks of this series taught me. You can't fix the environment perfectly. Phone optimized for no dopamine, notifications off, tracking work hours, taking action on your main thing, and your brain will still look for an exit even if you get all the variables right. Because the environment fixes remove the easy paths out, but they don't change what your brain is primed to want. And if you spend months or years giving your brain constant small dopamine hits throughout the day, short form, social, food at the desk, background noise like music or constant checking of your phone, all this stuff is just kind of blasting your baseline dopamine expectations for just this high stimulation. So you're constantly in that state of just wanting to get more and more dopamine. When you sit down to do some focused work, which is low stimulation by design, your brain reads this as a deficit, something that's not normal or something's wrong, right? And it looks for a fix. The issue isn't that the distractions aren't available. It's that your brain has been trained to need them. Section 2, what I actually eliminated. So I want to be specific about what I cut, because dopamine detox gets thrown around online in forms of challenges like 75 hard or monk mode, and maybe you've heard of these. And don't get me wrong, I like these challenges, and they have a time and a place, but they don't fix the root cause, which is what these videos are all about. They mean different things to different people, but what I cut out for 7 days, all the short form content, YouTube shorts, anything under 10 minutes, any YouTube for entertainment or TV shows, movies, no drugs, alcohol, all social media, browsing, even just passive scrolling while I'm posting. Any music or podcast, anything while I'm working. No snacking at the desk, eating became its own separate activity, and no checking my phone during work blocks for any reason. What I kept was long form YouTube, like searching something I needed a solution to. My training blocks, books, conversations, and the work, obviously. The line was drawn between passive consumption that spikes my dopamine versus engagement that builds or produces something, aka your main thing. The distinction matters because a dopamine detox isn't about suffering, it's about removing the inputs that fragment your baseline and replacing it with something that doesn't just fragment it. You can't just take something out and expect your body to not react or think nothing's wrong. Because if you're using social media, for instance, you get like 80 out of 100 dopamine by doing that. You need to give it something else that's going to give it maybe like 20 out of 100, like doing a workout or something. You still get some dopamine, but it's more of that longer lasting dopamine, which means you get less of it immediately, but it'll stay with you longer throughout the day. Section 3, day by day, what actually happened. Days 1 and 2 were fine. I'd done the no social media thing before for years. This wasn't new to me, but day 3 is where things got interesting. I sat down to work and noticed something I didn't have a word for at the time. Everything felt kind of flat. Not sad or unmotivated, just quiet. Best way I could describe it is like, if you've ever filmed with a camera, if you know what slog is for Sony, how it just kind of washes out all the color, it's like gray. That's kind of what it felt like. Like the background hum I've been living with for years had dropped. I just disappeared, I guess, right? But the silence felt kind of uncomfortable, not because something was wrong, but because I wasn't used to it. Day 4 and 5, something shifted, the flat feeling started to lift, and it was replaced with not really a rush or high, but like a steadiness, right? I sat down to work and the pull wasn't there the same way. Not gone, but like a little quieter. The gap between wanting to check something and actually checking it had gotten wider. And in that gap, I had a choice. For the detox, the gap basically zero. The thought and the action were the same thing. You think about picking up your phone, you do it. By day 5, they were separate. Day 6 and 7, I had 2 of the best work sessions I had in months. Not because I was firing on all cylinders or in some elevated state, right? Because the baseline resistance to starting was just lower. By lowering the dopamine I was getting from anything else, that cheap dopamine that was spiking my levels, I was able to work for longer as a byproduct of this. I sat down, I started, there's no negotiation, right? And it may not seem very important, but if you spent years negotiating with yourself before every work session, you know exactly how significant this is. So I'll start right after this episode, or right at the end of this video, or after 10 more minutes on my phone. There's none of that. The dopamine detox didn't make me more disciplined, it made discipline less necessary. Section 4, the neuroscience. Why this worked. The dopamine baseline. So I'm not a neuroscientist, but here's the simplified version of what happened based on what I've learned online through people like Huberman and that kind of adjacent crowd. So dopamine is basically just the pleasure chemical or the reward mechanism in your brain. It's the wanting chemical. It drives you towards things before you get them, and your brain calibrates how much dopamine to release based on what you're used to receiving, right? So high stimulation environments, high baseline expectation. Low stimulation environment, low baseline. So when your baseline is high, everything that doesn't match that baseline feels boring. Unfocused work, sitting still, reading, thinking, all this will feel so much harder than it actually is because your brain is comparing this to TikTok, right? Which is the equivalent to slots, like just constant information. Very hard for your brain to compete with this. You're just reading a book, right? When you drop the input for long enough, the baseline recalibrates. Humans are very adaptable, and suddenly the work doesn't feel like fighting upstream anymore. It feels just like work, which is all it ever was. The friction was added, but you can remove it. You don't need more motivation to do the work. You need to stop poisoning your baseline with inputs that make work feel so much worse by comparison. Section 5, what I kept after the 7 days. So at the end of the 7 days, I had a choice. Back to normal or redesign what normal meant. So short form content, I still don't use short form content on my phone since I think it'll single-handedly kind of nuke your baseline dopamine receptors. Like, put this into perspective for you. I don't know anyone successful in business who uses short form content regularly. Now flip that. How many successful people do you know who create it? I mean, in the age of AI, that's something to think about. And I talk about this in my Brain Rot series, so maybe check that out if you want. But the YouTube system I built, no homepage, no shorts or autoplay, that stayed. For background noise while working, I changed this back since I tend to like listening to music while I work. I find it makes it more fun and I'm able to be more productive this way, but checking my phone during work blocks, I'll check occasionally for communication, but it's a deep work block. I almost forget it exists, to be honest. I feel like so locked in. Even relaxing in the evenings now, I feel like I only need like an hour or two to wind down before bed, when before it would take me a minimum of 4 hours to feel like I had enough relaxation. This goes back to the dopamine loading idea I covered in a separate video. Load the stimulation at the end of the day, not through it. The morning and the work hours stay clean. The evening can be a little more flexible. That's the sustainable version. Not monk mode forever. Front-loaded discipline. The back half of the day doesn't matter as much, right? Get your main thing done, eat the frog principle, all that. Section 6, what this revealed. So here's the thing I noticed during the 7 days. That I wanted to come back to in more depth in a later video, but before I started the series, I called myself a slow starter. Not a morning person, someone who needed time to warm up. And I acted accordingly. Every morning I would just ease in, give myself permission to be slow, but during the detox when stimulation was gone and my baseline was lower, I just started. No warm up, no easing in, just sat down and started. Because when there's nothing else to do, and the most dopamine you can get is from opening your laptop and starting the work, that's what you're gonna do. And I realized this slow starter story wasn't really about me, it was about what I've been feeding my brain before I tried to start. The I'm not a morning person statement. I've been making it true by acting it out every day in the morning as if it was true. But It was never a fact. It was a habit I'd labeled as a personality trait. That's the difference. And the difference is going to be a whole video on its own, but because it goes deeper than just the morning, so stay tuned for that. So here's the thing. I felt on day 3 that I didn't have a word for it. The flatness, the quiet, slightly uncomfortable kind of stillness, if you will, when all the background stimulation drops out. I've thought about it a lot since then, and I think it was more of, it was a baseline. Your brain, how it actually feels like, and it's not being constantly pushed and pulled by things designed to push and pull it. Most of us have never sat in that feeling long enough to be comfortable with it. Because the moment it shows up, the moment you feel that boredom or slight discomfort of not doing anything, we reach for something to fill it up, to give us that dopamine. But that discomfort is not a problem. It's your brain recalibrating, the system resetting, right? You can sit for 3 or 4 days. What comes out on the other side isn't a high, it's just clarity, which could be worth more. 7 days, no dramatic transformation, no limitless superhuman focus, just flatter baseline and less negotiation before I start working. Which sounds small until you start negotiating with yourself before every session. Then suddenly, you don't have to. Next video is about identity and going into a little bit of the neuroscience for that. Specifically why the stories you tell yourself about the type of person you are might be the last thing standing between you and actually fixing this. Or the first thing. And that's going to be one different from the rest of the series here, but anyways, take consistent action on your main thing and don't stop. Peace.